Hi, this is Andy Mann, Instructional Technology Consultant from Muskegon Area ISD. I thank you for tuning in to our Learning on the Lakeshore Wednesday webinars.
Let's try this again. I had my microphone muted. My name is Andy Mann, and you're watching the Wednesday webinar series for the Learning on the Lakeshore. Let me begin by sharing, if you have not seen where these are, I'll just go ahead and show you up over on the page here.
This is the
Learning on the Lakeshore page. It's learningonthelakeshore.org. And over on this page, up here on the top, we have the information here about the entire series that we have. I'll just make this a little bit larger so you can see it better. Today we have Steve Dennison talking about how to grab students' attentions with effective presentations. And next week we have Alex Parr from Mona Shore Schools, a social studies teacher from the middle school. He's going to be sharing about primary sources and tech tools. If you missed one of the webinars, you can come over here to the Wednesday webinar page and click this page right here. And here we have where you can watch a recording of the presentation. This little block right here should be showing up any second. And this is the recording for today. And any other links that we have will be showing right here. Matter of fact, if you look at this one right now, it will say watch it live. So with that, let me introduce Steve Dennison. He is the instructional coach and sort of other hats, supports curriculum at Ravenna Public Schools. And Steve's going to be sharing today. I do want to tell you that if during our conversations, if you have any questions, if you roll your mouse up to the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see something that looks like a little Rubik's Cube, a little 9-square waffle. And if you click on that, there'll be a choice that says Q&A, and it will also say Showcase. And if you go to the Q&A, you can enter questions there. You can also click on it a second time, and that will hide the bar over on the right-hand side. So with that, I will be quiet here and give you a chance to listen to Steve.
All right. Thank you, Andy. I'm looking forward to sharing with you today. One of the challenges that we face in schools nowadays is there's so much content that we need to deliver to students that we can face the temptation to just get the information out there. We got so much we have to share that just get it out there. But what I want to share with you today is just some ideas to think about, and the fact that sometimes we really have to slow down and just make sure we have their attention and make sure we have them engaged with any kind of presentation we do. Now, a word of a warning or caution, I should say, is that I have in Ravenna, we tend to use PowerPoint, and I might accidentally say PowerPoint when I really mean is presentation. So whether you're using slides or PowerPoint or Prezi or some other kind of form, please understand if I say PowerPoint accidentally, I really do mean presentation in general. So let me begin by just kind of sharing with you a principle that I simply want to call WIFI. And what that is, it just basically stands for what's in it for you. And I want you to think in the sense of, can you clearly answer these questions? As you begin and you put together a presentation, can you answer these questions? And the first question that we would want to think about is, and as we're speaking to students, this is important to you, the student, because, and as you're working on your presentation, that's a question you need to be asking in the back of your mind. This is important to them because, and obviously we know the correct answer is not because it's on the test. But why is it important to you? Why is it important that you as a student need to listen to this? Also, I think about, what does this mean to you personally? And in this sense, I'm talking about, what does it mean to you as a teacher personally? Maybe you've had some kind of experience or something kind of story you can share with this, but what does it mean to you personally? Just a minute. Hold on just a minute. We're having a... We have a little technical issue we're trying to work through, and
They're not seeing your presentation yet,
Oh.
so we have to.
I understand you're not seeing my presentation, so just hold tight here, and thank goodness Andy's sitting right here and grab hold of my computer and and kind of take over. So maybe I can talk a little bit more as we're going through this. But think about how it can apply to you personally. I had an example from I visited a classroom on Monday, and the teacher was talking about chromosomes. It's a biology class, and she's talking about chromosomes and the X and the Y, and she kind of gave an illustration, and she talked about, take a look at your earlobe. And she had students look at each other's earlobes. And, well, you never don't really typically look at an earlobe. And so she gets your attention because, okay, this is something personal. What's my earlobe is like? Can you curl your tongue? Can you, the freckles and the color of your hair? And she gave different examples of how the, how it would apply. So what does it mean to you personally? Another thing is, why am I telling you this? Just a question you can be asking yourself. And when you ask this question, it's forcing you to really get to the root of what's most important. What is it that my students really have to know through this? And then the last question is, what if a student says, or so what? Or who cares? Now, it's not every day a student's going to say that to you, but what if the student says, so what? How would you respond? And those are the kinds of things you want to have in the back of your mind as you begin a presentation. So I'm going to kind of skip through some of these slides here, this points I just made here. Okay.
They're seeing this. So.
Oh, okay. I see you're seeing probably just the base form. So I'll just keep on talking here what we can. So we talked about what's in it for you. So that's important to know. But the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that we need to take the initiative or take the responsibility of saying, I need to capture your attention. And so the next key word is the word capture. And it's the kind of thing is, why should your students care? Now, we all know that when your students walk in the classroom, they're not walking in thinking, oh man, I can't wait to learn about chromosomes today. Or I can't wait to hear this discussion about the War of 1812. Realistically, that's not going to happen. And so we need to think about, as we begin a presentation, we can't just put the information, say, okay, here's the information for today, but think about, how can I capture their attention? And so the first question is, the first thing I would suggest is just asking a question. And we don't want to have the question that has a one answer, the who, what, why, the who, what, when kind of question, but focus more on the why questions, the how questions, and even kind of the question where it's like, if you were in this situation, what do you think you would do? Because you want to make it personal. You want to make it something they can relate to. So ask a question to begin with, and not only at the very beginning, but even interspersed throughout the presentation. So it's not just slide after slide after slide of information, but ask the question sometimes through there. The next thing we would talk about is maybe present a fact, a really important fact, or a key quotation related to the presentation. Our elementary principal does announcements every morning, and one thing he does at the very end is he always shares some really unique fact about maybe an animal or maybe about something in history. But the idea is, he's saying, this is really kind of an interesting thing about that you students might want to know. And the whole idea is that to get you thinking, I wonder if, or I wonder why is it that way? And it's the same way with the presentation. Your goal is to try to get them to wonder, to somehow become engaged with the whole idea. Another idea is maybe a retrospective approach. For example, you might say, in 1916, this particular situation might have been seen in this particular way. But now that it's 100 years later, in 2016, we look at it completely differently. And then you can begin to talk about how they might see it today as it was compared to like 100 years ago. And so maybe take the approach of, as you begin your presentation, take a retrospective perspective. Another idea is to share some anecdotes. Now, everyone loves a story. And maybe you've been in a large room and there's several people talking, and suddenly somebody starts telling a story. And have you ever noticed how people will suddenly begin to end their conversations and start to focus on the person telling the story? It's our nature to want to hear stories. And if those stories involve us personally, or if it involves someone in the class, it's going to carry a whole lot more weight than just a generic story. But maybe start your presentation with a story to help capture their attention. I would also talk about the fact that maybe use a web activity. For example, you might want to do like a word cloud. And just if you can use an elementary example, you might say, okay, students, when I say the word tiger, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What's the one word that comes to your mind? And as the students start giving responses, start typing them in onto the word cloud, and then at the end kind of display it, and you'll see, of course, the words that have the more responses are going to show up bigger in this word cloud. And then suddenly you have that visual graphic in front of you. That's a launching point as you begin this unit or this discussion about tigers, for example. You could perhaps use a simulation from some website, a math interactive or some kind of science simulation. Or maybe even start off your presentation with a formative assessment just to get a feel on where your students are at. That's something to think about. So capture their attention. Now let's think also about the flow of the presentation. Now, the most common form of presentation is going to be the chronological, very sequential. Okay, this leads to this, to this, and this to this, and that sort of thing. But what if we took a different approach? What, for example, let's say we present a problem and say, I have a problem. Here's my problem. And you talk about it, and then you say, okay, let's take a look at what are some possible solutions. And on the next slide, one possible solution is, and you present it. But there might be more than one way to fix this problem. And you go to the second slide, which shows another possible solution. And depending on what your subject is, there might be 3 or 4 different possible solutions to this problem. But the whole idea is that you're trying to get them to look at this particular thing from different angles, from different perspectives. And so maybe present it as a problem and then present some solutions. How about the idea of maybe presenting it as benefits and features of this particular topic? So instead of just putting the information, just saying, here's the benefit, and if you really wanted to make it work, here's the benefit to you. And here's the benefit to your friends. And make it as almost like, I'm not a salesman in any way, but almost take it from the approach of being a salesperson who's trying to persuade and convince your students there are some benefits to knowing this, taking that angle. Another idea is to perhaps create a Venn diagram and do some compare and contrast or identify similarities and differences if we want to use one of Marzano's instructional strategies. Look at one angle. Look at the other angle. What do they have in common? Do some comparing and contrasting. Another idea is perhaps doing a court hearing. Perhaps imagine that you have this information. And as a teacher, it's going to be your job, and you're saying to your students, you know what? I'm going to be the prosecuting attorney, and I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to convince you that this is something you need to know. And you take the position of attorney, and you begin to present your case and saying, here's this angle, and here's this angle, and here's how it works in this situation. And so by the end of that presentation, you're going to persuade your students that here's why you need to know this. So there's another possibility. Now, let's think about the role of images. The old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I want to do something right now. And I think you can see on your screen, there's a picture here of a man sitting in a chair. And I know there's going to be some silence here for a moment, but I want you to take a look at the picture. And I want you to Look closely at it. What do you see? And the silence in your classroom is going to be awkward. But to have your students just stop and look at the picture. What do you see in this picture? And as they look at it, they suddenly say, oh, I see there's some crutches. Well, why would there be crutches? And it forces them to look at the bigger picture within the picture and saying, well, why would there be crutches? Or they might notice that there is a rifle sitting there. Well, why would there be a rifle? And if they're not really coming up with some good thoughts, maybe you might want to lead them along and say something like, well, look at the way he's sitting in that chair. What does that tell you about what he's thinking? And the whole idea behind this, by just putting a picture up on the screen, is you're moving the responsibility from you throwing everything at them to letting them discover. And suddenly, because they're looking at that picture and they're looking at all the different possible angles on it, suddenly their curiosity begins to rise up. Can you see how this would be effective? They're taking the initiative to try to figure out what is that picture all about. And it leads into what you want to talk about more. In this case, it'll probably be a history lesson of some kind. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. And sometimes you just need a picture to get the students thinking. So let's talk about the design. There's an old saying, it's the acronym KISS, and the old way of saying it was to keep it simple, stupid, but I don't like that, so I say keep it simple, silly. But that's so important. Keep your presentation simple. That'll make a difference, because we're not here to impress. We're not here to spend a lot of time putting all these things into it. Keep it simple. Another simple rule is keep in mind is don't over animate. Now, I love cool things. And I'm sitting next to Andy right here. I know Andy loves cool things. Okay, and it's so tempting to look at all these cool gadgets and the cool things you can do with a presentation. But as tempting as it is, don't become caught up in trying to do too much of it. Now, I'm not saying we can't do it, but don't over animate. Don't let it become a distraction to your presentation. Another thought to keep in mind is that if you're going to use bullet points, maybe limit it to 3, 4, maybe 5 bullet points. And it's the idea, and there's a saying that with the presentation slide, what you want to keep in mind is that you want to have no more on your slide than you would maybe fit on the back of a t-shirt. You want to keep it concise to the point. And so probably if you use bullet points, maybe you can have no more than 3, maybe 4 or 5 bullet points. Another thing to keep in mind, you've probably heard this before, and you've probably experienced it on the other end of it, is don't read the slide. That's almost insulting to your audience. Now, if you have first graders and you're doing a thing with them, obviously, or trying to teach them a new sight word, that's a different situation. But avoid reading the slide. That's very important. Now, I want to give you a good example about how keeping it simple. About a month ago, many of you are probably aware of a very tragic car accident that happened on Heights Ravenna Road, and a couple of Ravenna students lost their lives in that accident. And in the aftermath of that, there was a T-shirt that was printed, and it was made available to whoever wanted to purchase it. But I want you to look at this slide, because I think we can learn something about presentation slides by looking at this T-shirt. Because if you look at up in the upper left corner, you see one thing that stands out is the word strong. It's big, bold letters, and it wants to communicate the whole idea. It's an emotional word. It's strong. But underneath that, you'll notice there's 3 keywords or phrases or slogans. Slogans, phrases, keywords are catchy. They stick. And you'll notice in this situation, they use the words faith, they used family, they used fight. These are all important. They're emotional words. And when you can involve the emotions with your students, you're more likely to help them capture the main idea you're trying to teach. They use the picture of a bulldog. Now, this is especially important in Ravenna because they are the Ravenna Bulldogs. That's the names of their sports teams. But again, it's the emotion that captures their attention. Now, over on the right-hand side, you see the names of the 3 students who were involved in the accident: Emily, Peter, and Erica. It wasn't long sentences. It wasn't information about them. It was just simply one word. And it caught your attention. And immediately you thought you knew what it was. And even this idea of graphics, and you see the angel wings around Erica's, because she, at that point, at the time that the t-shirt was printed, Erica was the only one that had passed away in the accident. But can you see that what I'm saying by being simple and using emotion to capture your students, involve them? So let's talk a little bit about the templates. Now, if you look on the left-hand side, you will see there's like a bright yellow with all kinds of squiggly lines in the background. And boy, that looks sharp and looks exciting. But when you try to put text on top of that, it's very distracting. And this kind of background is probably not the best kind of background to use. On the right-hand side, you see it's a very simple template. And actually, that's the template I'm using for this whole presentation. You notice how simple it is? It leaves a lot of white space so that what you actually put on your slide is going to be the most important thing, not the background. Another thing to keep in mind is that as you think of a template, you want to keep in mind the lighting in your room. Because if there's a lot of lighting right above the screen, it's better to have a light background. It's going to show up better. If it's dimly lit above the screen, it's better to use a dark background. And I know that doesn't seem to make sense, but it does show up better if you have those kinds of backgrounds showing up. So keep that in mind. Now, when we think about fonts that we want to use in our presentation, let me just use this illustration. When we think of the IRS and tax season, yes, it's tax season right now. When we think of the IRS font, we don't necessarily think of what you see on the left-hand side, where it's a very elegant, you are cordially invited to attend an audit. You know, what we see instead is a very very strong, send us your money, send your money now kind of thing. And your font can sometimes affect the mood in which students receive information. Now, I would not spend a lot of time trying to figure out the font, but just keep in mind that sometimes a font can affect the student's perception on the presentation. And so in this next picture here, you can see there's some examples of some light fonts and some heavy fonts. And the lights would be better for like just where you might maybe have your bullet points or your sentences, that kind of thing. The Arials, the Comic Sans, the Century Gothic, those kinds of things. The heavy fonts are better for like your headlines or your titles or the things that you really want to grab their attention with. So keep that in mind, you know, the difference between the light and the heavy fonts. I would also encourage you, as you think about color, does it really matter? Now, again, this is one of those kinds of things that you don't want to spend a ton of time, you know, thinking about, but it's something you might want to consider. Now, in this picture, there's a picture of a locker room that's got pink lockers. And this is just a good example of how color can sometimes affect us, because this was the University of Iowa, and I believe it was the University of Hawaii, and there was one other college that tried to do this. They would paint their home team, their home locker rooms of, you know, masculine, you know, strong, aggressive kinds of colors. And for the visiting team, the opponents, they would paint them pink, with the idea that pink is more of a passive, laid-back kind of color. Now, you won't find that kind of extreme in the presentation that you make, but there are some things to keep in mind with color. And the first thing I would say is that the magic number of colors, the number of colors you have in your presentation, should be probably no more than 2 or 3. Because when you get into a whole bunch of different colors, it almost becomes more of a distraction than it is a help. I would also talk about maybe understand the difference between the warm colors, the pinks, maybe the light reds, the oranges, versus cool colors. That can sometimes affect the mood of how students receive things. Perhaps the best rule of thumb is, when possible, use black text. And the reason being is that there are students who are colorblind. They might not tell you that, but the more black type you can use, probably the better off you're going to be. Keep that in mind. I found this interesting. I just kind of threw this in there, but I found out that the color green tends to reduce stress. Now, this is just some research that was done. I never thought of it in that way, but I thought that was interesting. I wanted to include that. And I would also suggest, and you might even see how difficult it is to see this yellow, especially on the white background. Now, it might work on a real dark screen, but yellow is not necessarily a good color when you're doing a presentation. Just something to keep in mind. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you today. Just keep in mind that when we're doing a presentation, it's so tempting just to kind of, okay, here's the information, take down your notes, this is what you have to know. But I would challenge you to really look at it in a whole different perspective and saying, as a teacher, I'm going to take that extra effort to capture their attention, make that extra effort to understand this is why you need to know this, and to try to present it in a way that's more than just, here's the facts, here's the information. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, we can probably do it at this time.
Okay, I'm going to check the Q&A and just see if we have any questions over in the question and answer area. It does not look like we have any. So with that, let me present from me instead of Steve here. So thanks, Steve, for that great presentation. We will be putting a copy of that out on our Learning on the Lakeshore site. And let's just make sure there we go. And I also want to once again remind you that that we not only have the presentation over here on the Learning on the Lakeshore site, but we also have all for presenters for the Learning on the Lakeshore conference. And if you or someone you know might be a potential candidate, I would suggest they come over here to the Learning on the Lakeshore conference, learningonthelakeshore.org. Click on the conference, and there is a hyperlink here with this call for presenters is now open, and there's a hyperlink right down here, and that will take them in to the call for presenters. It is August 16th. That's a Tuesday, and it will be held at the Stevenson Center at Muskegon Community College. And we do have pre-conference workshops that we're working to get information on those on August 15th. They're half-day conferences. And so thanks again for tuning in today, and tune in every Wednesday from now through the end of May. And again, if you want to remember what's coming up, you can go to learningonthelakeshore.org, and down here we have a list of the 10 or 12 that we have, and we also have lists back to the previous ones. So thanks again, everybody, for participating today, and thank you, Steve.
Welcome. Welcome.
And let me... All right. All right, bye.